Hey yo, what up? It is your boy, Porcupine TV here. And last episode of Porcupine TV, we broke down the top 10 games of the year. On this episode, we are going to be breaking down the top 10 games of the past 10 years, the decade from 2010 to 2019. Let's get right into this. Now, before we get into this, I just wanted to specify that we are going to be breaking down the top 10 games of the decade from 2010 to 2019. Let's get right into this. Now, I will be excluding the Big Chungus franchise of games because, if we included that, every game on the list would be Big Chungus. And also, Big Chungus has been the punchline for like 5 videos now, and it really wasn't even that funny to begin with. I kind of want to kill myself. So let's get right into this. Number 10 game of the decade, Raid Shadow Legends. Now, you may be surprised to see a mobile game on the top 10 games of the decade, and that is because the quality of this RPG rivals that of console and PC gaming. It has strategic gameplay, great boss fights, and over 400 champions to choose from. Use code Porcupine for 800 gold and a nice porcupine skin. Moving on to the number 9 spot, we got Earth Defense Force 5. Now, this is a third-person shooter game where aliens have invaded the Earth, and these aliens look like gigantic insects. You have to fight off massive hordes of ants and spiders. I mean, just look at this gameplay. What more could you want from a video game? There's like 100 fucking levels. Moving on to our number 8 spot, Super Mario 64, the 64th installment in the Mario franchise, and it brought Mario to the third dimension of space. In this game, Mario could not only go forward, backward, up and down, but he could now move left and right, which, the possibilities are endless. No one had even contemplated the idea that Mario could exist in an X, Y, and Z plane, and that is why this game is so revolutionary and why it is one of the best games of the decade. Moving on to number 7, one of my favorite games of all time, Cuphead. Now, this is a platformer game where you play as a cup, and it is designed to look like a 60s cartoon. The entire game is a series of boss fights. Every single boss has great design. Every boss is memorable, and every boss has a reasonable challenge to it. And it's just a fun time from start to finish, except for the mermaid boss, which needs to be fucking removed from the game. She has an unavoidable attack where you will turn into stone while 7 snakes shoot rocks at you. There's no strategy whatsoever to avoid the rocks. I don't know who thought this would be a good idea to turn you into stone, but they need to be fired. Other than that, pretty good game. Please release the DLC. It has been 3 years. Moving on, number 6 is Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, the newest game from Software, the greatest game developers of all time. This game is the reason why it took so long to get this video out. I decided to revisit the game after I talked about it in my Game of the Year video. In my last video, I said I quit halfway through because the game got really hard. I was not even remotely close to halfway through the game. I thought I had beaten 8 or 9 bosses, but apparently those were all mini bosses, and I had only completed 1 boss, which is meant to be the tutorial boss of the game. So I devoted the past 20 days of my life to finishing this game, and it was well worth it. This game is an absolute masterpiece. The combat in this game is the best combat system in any game ever made. It makes Jedi Fallen Order look like garbage. Moving on to another Souls-like game, number 5, Hollow Knight. This game perfected the Metroidvania genre, got a good cartoon art style, very creative combat system with the nail. Overall, just a masterpiece of a game. Moving on to the number 4 spot, it's gotta be Solitaire for iPad. It took everything that was great from the original Solitaire for iPhone, but in this one, you can play it on an iPad. Moving on to number 3, we have Doom 2016. This game has the most enjoyment per second in any video game ever made. There's not a dull moment in this game. It has some of the sexiest gore in any video game. You go to Mars and shit. Absolute masterpiece. Moving on to the number 2 spot, we have Dark Souls. This game has such good level design that it spawned an entire genre of games, the Souls-like game. Some of the most memorable and well-designed boss fights are in this game as well. Ornstein and Smough is probably the best boss fight other than the Ender Dragon in Sans. The only downside is the second half of the game is borderline unplayable garbage. But the first half more than makes up for it, and it is, in my opinion, the greatest game of all time. Moving on to the number 1 game of the decade, and that is, of course, Minecraft. This is a game where the entire world is made out of blocks, which, I mean, alone makes it deserving of being on this list. But on top of that, there is a crafting system where you can mine items from the ground, and then you can use those items to craft more items. At first, the game seems kind of boring, but this is intentional. In fact, boredom is a mechanic in the game. The game is so unimaginably boring that when you find those diamonds, the dopamine receptors in your brain reach levels above orgasm, and you want to play the game for 12 more hours. And this boredom mechanic is so addicting that the game has become the highest grossing game of all time. It is one of the most recognizable games in pop culture, and it is the leading cause of autism in young children. And that is why it is the number 1 game of the decade. So let me know if you agree with my list. Was your favorite game snubbed on my list? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, stay piney.